Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Milan Ježovic. I'm Senior Fellow at MESA 10 here in Bratislava, and we welcome you to the continuation of our debates between the university students from Belgrade, Serbia, and from Bratislava, Slovakia. This is a joint project of MESA 10 of Bratislava, Slovakia, and Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies in Belgrade, Serbia. Welcome, and today, before starting the debate, we will have a shortened version of a lecture, which we always listen to. I'm glad and honored to have an opportunity to welcome among us again Peter Bator, who is advisor to Slovakia's permanent representative to NATO. He will share with us his thoughts on the topics that we will be debating later on, and he has a presentation which will hopefully work and which we will hopefully be able to see both here in Bratislava and Belgrade. Rastio, can you please put on the presentation, and Peter, you have the floor.
So still good morning to Belgrade and also good morning here in Bratislava. Thank you especially to our students that came this long way, and what I heard it was a long way in the train to get from Serbia to Slovakia. So we appreciate it very much. There's just a strange sound starting to hum. Everything's working against us today. Yes, you can put it on. And it's always like this, that when I prepare something, then I'm told that, okay, you have to shorten it because we don't have enough time. So I will try to be brief, and hopefully we'll get something, well, I can make it in something like 30 minutes or so. Can you see the presentation on the screen?
Yes.
That's great. Okay. Now you see the most important part, and then I will just elaborate a bit on the rest. So please, next slide. We have, by the way, a beautiful assistant just standing next to the notebook, and she's got no chair, so she'll be standing all the time that I will be speaking. So this is the sacrifice that she's giving to the project as well. Her name is Lucia, and you know her from the previous times. So what I will be talking about today is 4 topics. The first one is NATO and the EU. Do they compete, or do they cooperate, or do they complement each other? I will talk about the principles and values and how it is really in the reality. Then NATO and prosperity. Is it really true that when you're a NATO member, then you will be prosperous and you will have no economic problems, or at least will NATO help you to be well off, or no? And then something that is really hot and for many analysts sexy these days, that's Ukraine, but we'll take it maybe mostly from the view of values, principles, and also if there are any wise solutions. And of course there is this question whether sanctions will work in this case. And then because it was very popular last time, we included it this time as well. What is NATO doing other than military actions? So what do we do in NATO other than sending troops and aircrafts to intervene somewhere in the conflict? So let's start. NATO and EU. Are they really so different? If you look at this picture, the animals might be different, but they're heading the same direction, at least it seems so in this picture. And we'll see whether it is really so, because as you know, in Europe we've got 2 popular clubs, and there are aspirants that are really wanting to get in. Some of them, they want to become NATO members but do not want to become the EU members. Some of them want to get into EU but then don't want to be a NATO members, and some of them just want to have it all. It's usually the case for the new states that like to have it all, because you know that they still feel that they are lacking something, so they want to grab everything. But if we look at Serbia, it's I think it's the only state now, maybe with Moldova as well, that is not aspiring for NATO membership, but only EU membership for different reasons. But that is the fact. But if you can put on the next slide, yes. If we look at the values that these 2 organizations are based on, you will, and then on the next slide we'll see NATO in a minute, you will see that the core is the same. It's the same because Europe is almost the same. We've got our differences, but one of the main ideas when we were talking about Europe whole, free, and at peace, and also having it united economically was that we will build on one solid ground, and this is the values. And those values are democracy, freedom, democracy, rule of law. And then when you just look at the EU, they go much further. They go also to social spheres of the life. They go to economics, etc. If we look then at NATO, it's more, yeah, and you can click it on. Then you can see it's a bit shorter, but this does not mean that it's less. This is the core values that NATO and EU shares. If you look at NATO, of course, freedom, peace, security, shared values. This is what NATO is built on, and then NATO is mostly focused on also on the defense and military aspects. But if you, and you can click the next slide, please. But the differences will be much more visible when it comes to aspirants and when it comes to NATO enlargement, when it comes to EU enlargement. Both organizations have criteria to be fulfilled before the aspirants can become members. If you look at EU, they have 33 chapters, and each chapter has subchapters, another criteria, benchmarks, and it is really very well structured, and it encompasses all spheres of life. You can read it on the screen that they start with the freedom of movement for people, goods, capitals, and services. But you can find there things like agriculture, social issues, justice, security, science, research. If you look at NATO, and that's the next slide, then you will see that it's more, and this is just for illustration, it is more focused on the core, what is the alliance doing. So when you compare these two organizations, you may say that, okay, they might be quite similar when it comes to values, but then they are totally different when it comes to the core, what they are doing, or not totally different. The EU is much broader. It includes some of the aspects that NATO is dealing with, but then it has a broad range of issues that are totally out of the area, if I may use this NATO language, for NATO. In praxis, or in reality, I have a very good example of Montenegro. When you go there and you ask people what are their wishes to be integrated, they say, and some of the people say, okay, we have no problem with the EU, but we may have some problems with NATO. That's exactly the case with Serbia, but for different reasons. If you ask, especially in Montenegro, why do you think that you want to go to EU and not to NATO? They say, because if we go to NATO and if we are integrated in NATO, we will lose our sovereignty, we will lose our voice, and we can't just decide about things. If you look in reality, in NATO, and I talked about that last time, NATO is a consensus-based organization. Nothing will be approved till all 28 nations do not agree. In the EU, in NATO, it's still dealing only, or usually, with security and defense, nothing else. If you look at the EU, you don't have consensus there. So all the directives and everything that the member states have to fulfill is approved, well, different majorities, but those are majorities, so there's no consensus. In fact, it means that the state, once becoming an EU member, gives up on its sovereignty and part of independence, because, well, if you want to call a banana a first-class banana, it must have a certain parameters. If you want to use a normal bulbs, light bulbs, then you can't, because the EU has decided that, okay, you can't use it anymore. If you want to pay a lot of, or if the mobile operators want to charge you a lot of money, the EU say, okay, no, you can't do that. This has direct impact on everyday life of the citizens. So you're losing much more in the EU than in NATO. But usually the substance and the name of NATO and the image is much more restrictive. But in reality, the difference is much more visible. Can you just put on the next slide? So is there a competition? Yes. In certain fields, usually it comes in the field of security and defense, but not in a way that they would just compete who would be the first to participate in an operation or who would be the first to go somewhere and to stabilize. It's mostly the defense industry It's also all the issues that are dealing with defense from the structural point of view. But this is not a real competition. In December last year, the European Council has agreed on 80 plus measures how to increase and how to better the European Union in the sphere of defense and security. So there's not really competition. I would call it more complementarity, because the EU is mostly focused on the soft power. They can send observers missions. They can send negotiations. NATO is usually the implementator. It's someone who comes when there is a valid decision and to implement it with I would say hard power. It does not mean that NATO does not have the soft power, but usually it's mostly focused on this. If I may have next slide. But then we can also talk about cooperation. This one is valid mostly for the economic part of the EU and the US, but as the United States is part of NATO, then we may also call it as if we integrated the United States and Europe in one package. Where do they cooperate? If you look at Kosovo, one of the best examples how NATO and the European Union can cooperate in the field. EU has EULEX. There, NATO has its own operation KFOR. Then there are the Kosovo security forces. Those three elements have a direct and very clear division of labor, and especially division of labor between the EULEX and KFOR. In theory, it should work. In praxis, it means that KFOR is sometimes doing the EULEX job, and EULEX sometimes is doing the KFOR job. In the field, they really cooperate. One of very few examples how it works. We have very similar mission in Afghanistan. It's not the case there. If you come to this institutional level, and it is no secret, the cooperation between these two parts of Brussels, as we used to call it, is, well, if we even may call it cooperation, because we have Turkey as a NATO member, who's not a member of the European Union. We've got Cyprus, who's the member of the European Union, and the cooperation is really blocked. When I see it from NATO's point of view, we can't even agree on having several meetings with the EU just to exchange information on an official level. The only level that works quite fine is staff-to-staff talks, which is unofficial. We will just use as background briefings. But when it comes to sitting together and not even talking about adopting joint decisions, this is well, unrealistic right now. Why? Because Cyprus has not signed the security agreement with NATO on exchange of classified information, and it will probably not. And it's because NATO will not agree on signing this, because we've got Turkey and now in the alliance. But when it came to the crisis in Ukraine, one of really very few meetings between the EU and NATO took part in Brussels in the first days, just to exchange views how the NATO and EU members see the situation. If we may have another slide. And as I said, so there's a question that I will probably not give answer to, but if you look at the states, and this is the GDP they produce, and if you can see just in the upper part, in the middle upper part, you can see Slovakia and Serbia, but they have no part of this cake just because it's so small that it could not be fit in it just to be visible when you compare it with the rest. But there, Serbia and Slovakia are there. And the question is, do the rich states integrate because they are rich and they want to cooperate with each other, or are they rich because they cooperate? And this is the question that, well, you may answer for yourself. Well, I would say the fact is that if they cooperate together, it brings profits to both. And to all of them, the rich cooperating with those who are not that rich, and I would say help each other. But I just wanted to show on this slides that if you look at I can't see it well, the European Union and the rest of the world and the United States, then how big difference it is. And why I put this slide on, because I will further on talk about the prosperity and NATO. And we may go there. If I may have another slide, please. So, NATO and prosperity. This is something that many people are saying, okay, NATO does not bring us anything. If we want to be rich, if we want to be well off, then we just need to be integrated in the EU, and then everything's done, and it's fine. And the other camp is saying, okay, you need NATO to be prosperous because it will help you. So what are the facts? Is really NATO someone who can bring you more prosperity? If we talk about direct benefits, no. NATO is not an organization that would come to your country and give you direct investments. It will not give you economical incentives. It will not give you usually financial assistance. It's not someone who's just coming to the country and saying, look guys, you've got the money or you've got the resources, and then we can help you to develop. What it has is this indirect impact. Because once you're integrated, then first you're an exclusive club. It means that you're part of a club where you have another 27 nations. Yes, that's the same with the EU. But the states are different. In case of NATO, you've got the United States at the table. If you want to have some discussions, talks, negotiations, you've got all the nations in one building. This may help. Not even for NATO issues, but if you want to use your diplomacy, we use it sometimes also for bilateral issues. Then when you're a member of this club, it means that you had to do something to get inside. You had to reform your country. You had to introduce certain procedures. You're predictable in this way because the countries that are members of NATO, they know the system because they know that the system would be quite similar to the system they have in their countries. If they decide to come with the investment, they know, okay, they may look at your process, how you reformed your country, and then they may decide whether they would go for certainty somewhere and stability and safety for their investments, or they would just try to invest somewhere else. It's not exclusively the argument that would persuade someone to come with the investments or not. But if you have 2 or 3 countries and one of them is NATO member and the other 2 are not, then if it was me, I would just go for the country that I know. And then NATO, when I said NATO will not come to your country and will not bring money, it's not totally true. NATO has its projects, and I will mention it later a bit. The decomposition of surplus ammunition in Serbia, for example, over 9 million euros as a project. We would be happy to have it in Slovakia. And then you have Science for Peace programs. And in case of Slovakia, we got 2 million euros in the last 3 years from NATO. It's not a small amount if we're talking about scientists and non-governmental organizations. If I may have another slide. This is the Slovak GDP growth in the last years, and when you see it from left to right, that was great. I mean, if you see the figure in the middle, over 10%, this was something that was the highest growth in the European Union and one of the highest in the world as well. How we got there? Because of 2 facts. The first one, it was that it was before the crisis and the economic situation in the world was really very good for us. But still, there were other countries in the European Union, in NATO, that did not have that big growth. More importantly, it was the result of all the reforms that we had done before we came to NATO, before we integrated into NATO, and before we also got into the EU. As we reformed the system, and I have to say those reforms that we introduced at that time were probably the most difficult. And if you compare also the V4 region, like introducing flat tax rate, total reforming the taxation system, total reforming the social system, they were really hard. And people were not willing to accept it in many ways. But NATO and the EU totally helped us just to persuade people to accept it. That we always, and Milan knows probably the word in English, but we just have to save on everything, and people were really unhappy with that. But we told them, look, if you wait, then everything will be better. And then it turned out that it was a good decision. You may argue, okay, you did these reforms mostly because of the European Union, and you did this GDP growth because of the European Union. That might be true. NATO did not play that big part as the European Union. But look at the case of 3 states that joined NATO in 1999. If you look at their figures, and I don't have the charts here, unfortunately, they also had that growth before 1999 and between 1999 and 2004 when they entered the European Union. And it was also because of NATO. It raised their security, and it attracted the foreign investments just because they joined NATO. Those were the 3 countries from the region, showing that, look, guys, we're stable. We did all the reforms in a way that NATO was able to accept us. It was not only about security. At least you had to have a basic level of reforms and stability in the country. And this is what is important for the investments. And then we can have a next slide. So when it comes to defense, as a detrimental, when you invest money into defense, then you will probably not have that much money to invest anywhere else. When I talked about the decision that, okay, we may become a member of the European Union, but we will stay out of NATO, and economically that's fine. That's not totally true. You can see the defense spendings. You've got the whole world, and then you see NATO, and then you see some big countries like China and Russia. If you compare those figures, it's a big difference. If you're as a standalone state, if you decide, okay, I will do all the reforms, I will attract investments, I will just comply with the requirements of the EU, I might have no problems with my economic growth, and from this point of view, I don't need NATO at all. But now you look at your defense sector, and you have 2 options. First, you just don't reform it because you think it's fine, and then you have to invest in it. If you invest in something that has not been reformed, it's too costly. That's the first one. Second one, if you decide to reform it, it will cost you money. And then if you do some reforms, you always look for things, how to do it better, how to do it cheaper, how to do it more effectively. And for us as Slovakia, when we're thinking about this from this point of view, we had also 2 choices. The first one, just to build all necessary parts of our defense on our own, which means that we would have to invest in everything, in land forces, air force, services, personnel, everything. Or we could do specialization, which means that, and I think one of our colleagues talked about this last time when we had these questions from the Serbian debate team. If you look at Slovakia, we're now investing something about 1% of GDP for defense. It's not enough. We can feel it in our armed forces. We're criticized by that by NATO, but that's the fact. But we still have security guarantees that at least we think work. And we do a specialization. We have good engineers, we have good special forces, and we have money just to develop it further. If we need something else, we may ask our allies. Serbia is investing 2.2% of GDP for defense, or something around that. If you compare the security guarantees that Slovakia has as a NATO member, and how much we spent on defense, and if we look at Serbia, how much you spent, and what security guarantees you have, including that you have to invest in many things that we have not invested since joining NATO, because we don't need it anymore, because we have someone else who just can provide it. Otherwise, we would really not have money to have our armed forces. If we were not in NATO today, with the economic crisis and with the political decisions that we will today invest only 1% of our GDP, we would not be able to have anything almost. Our air force is not in very good shape. Our land force, okay. We have no tanks. We closed half of the bases that we had in Slovakia. We cut down the personnel by 60%. We would not survive without anyone else providing this. And we're still investing only 1%. If when NATO Secretary General during his last week's visit asked our Prime Minister just to invest more, our Prime Minister told him, okay, look, we are still consolidating our public finance. We don't have enough money. We will try to spend more effectively. but we will not give more money in the 2 years to come. This is not a fortunate, I mean, this is not a situation where we could develop our armed forces, but this is the fact. That's why without NATO it would not work. May I have the next slide? And this is what I was talking about, how much we spent. If you look at this, and with the figures that many NATO members have, there are only, if I'm not mistaken, 3 or 4 NATO members that fulfill the 2% criteria. The rest, they do not fulfill it. Romania, Poland, and Lithuania, they said they would increase their defense spending to 2% in the years to come. And there is a real pressure also from NATO to increase the defense spending, and I will come to this question why when I will be talking about crisis in the Ukraine. So this is the fact. So is it detrimental to other spendings if you spend more on defense? I would say it's more detrimental if you just decide to build your whole army just on your own. Then you will have to spend more money than you would otherwise spend. So and then just maybe a bit of mathematics. If you even spend 2.2% on defense, it means that you could have something like 48 ministries of defense and 48 armed forces if you used your whole budget only for defense. So if you look at this from this point of view, okay, we're just asking for 2%, which is like 1/50 of everything that you have at hand, then all the arguments saying that we can't invest so much is not that valid. And it's that valid for you as it is valid for us. So if you look at it from this perspective, it's fine. But still, if you want to keep your armed forces for the future ready, you will probably have to invest much more. Look at China, look at Russia, how much they invest in their forces just because they need to keep them, and they need to keep them prepared and also big. Maybe have next slide. Solidarity, yes. This is this is what is NATO about. When I talk that we have the security umbrella, it means, okay, you can enjoy the benefits, but you can only enjoy the benefits once you contribute. Because if you don't give anything and they give you everything, it will not work forever. So this is when we talk about 2% in Slovakia. Then this is the case for many states. As I said, there are only 3 or 4 states that are fulfilling the threshold of 2% of GDP. Lucia, maybe have another one? Crisis in Ukraine. This is something that we have been dealing with for the last several weeks. This really keeps us busy, and it does not make us happy at all. May I go for, well? So what happened in Ukraine was that the Russian forces, although they were not clearly marked, and from the beginning they were just declared not to be Russian forces, came to Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, and just started to took some of the bases, some of the public offices, everything. People, when you saw on the pictures, were just, I don't know, they just accepted it. And also the government in Kiev said that they were not willing to confront these forces. The main aim of this presence was to just provide for a referendum that turned out to be very successful for those who wanted to see Crimea out of Ukraine and not under the control of Kiev. The official argument for this was that the Kiev government, the current Kiev government, was not that one that got the support from the people. It was not legitimate, and the only legitimate representative of Ukraine was outside Ukraine, and he was the one who invited these forces to come to Crimea. What happened next was that the situation deteriorated further, and the situation was destabilized also in other regions, especially in south and east of Ukraine. If we look at this situation from the point of view of international law, then you have several really basic principles: sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, which means that there should be no one limiting you in exercising your sovereignty on your own territory. As well, if you have your territory, there is no one that could or might come and take the territory out of your control, unless it is agreed between the state that owns the territory. And of course, independence, which means that there should be no third party or no one who would just have the influence to tell you what to do, or who would just limit your right to exercise your sovereignty over your territory. The one of other principles, and that is anchored in the UN Charter, and that's the very basic on the international law, is no use of force or threat of use of force. Exactly saying that if you don't do this, we will send our troops. If you don't do this, we will just push you to do something, or even send your troops and say you will have to do this because otherwise we'll do something else. This is absolutely unacceptable. And then, if you don't comply with this, if you send your troops, if you try to take a part of your territory, if you do something, if you just try to take part of the territory out, then the international community might take sanctions. Based on the international law, it should be the Security Council of the United Nations that would decide. But we have witnessed this, that if at least one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council as a part of the conflict, this system will not work. And then it is up to the international community whether they would just decide to do something else. Sanctions and the form that have been adopted mostly by the European Union, but also bilaterally by France, Great Britain, Canada, United States, and the others, are not in contradiction with international law, because they are just bilateral actions, and those were political, economic, and military. You might have seen that NATO was the first one to issue its public statement saying about illegality of the Russian actions, etc. Then the European Union came, and now you can see the divisions between the European Union and NATO. European Union focused on economic sanctions mostly. NATO, what NATO did was that it took care of the defense and security of its allies. NATO does not have, as an organization, any powers, any tools in its hand to impose economic sanctions. The member states can, and they did, but NATO can't. European Union, that's a different animal, because there was also a system of economic cooperation with Russia, but also some other plans like a visa-free regime that would just not work once the European Union decided to stop it. If we may have the next slide. What the EU do, as I said, it's more soft power, economic sanctions, and then the political measures that the European Union took. And then we had NATO on the next slide. And when I talk that NATO took care mostly about the defense and security of its members, that was one aspect, and I will just come to it a bit later. But it also suspended the cooperation with NATO. We had quite a rich cooperation in Afghanistan and fight against terrorism, and detecting explosives in the crowds. Some of those projects very successful, but we were really left with no chance then to stop everything, because how could we cooperate with someone that did everything in contradiction with the international law? And this is more controversial for the world, I would say, or for the public. And we had to also take care of defense of our member states, especially the Baltic states, but Poland, Romania, as well. It means, and you've got the short-term and long-term measures. The short-term measures are just to reinforce the air policing over Baltic states, to send some troops to bases in Poland, for example. But in the longer-term perspective, there are discussions, you might have read it, about permanent or non-permanent stationing of troops, of NATO troops, in the eastern part of NATO. This is something that was not something that would NATO plan to do. But this was something that NATO had to do, and NATO had to think of. It was just pushed by the developments. We were really just worrying about the program for the next NATO summit, which will be taking place in September 4th and 5th in Wales. that we were just looking for agenda. After this crisis, we have one central topic, and this is how to keep the alliance ready, able, and willing to protect its members, and how to have enough resources to do so. And this is also the main message that the NATO Secretary General is sending during his visits, farewell visits in all member states. And this is exactly what he did also in Slovakia. Maybe we have next slide. And this slide also only 4 pictures show something that NATO did and this 4 slides, and there were more published, was something that NATO did not used to do. We just made public the intel information that we had on the Russian forces, just to make public. This was one of the tools how we could just show what information we are working with. So this was something special in the crisis in Ukraine when it came to intelligence sharing with the public. May I have next slide? And I think then we'll continue, and really very briefly, because I don't think we have enough time. What is NATO doing beyond military? And I talked about it last time, but we have several areas where NATO is doing something that has really nothing or only a bit common with military actions or with the defense policy. First and foremost, and this is very actual right now, it's disaster relief. We have an organization called Euro-Atlantic Disaster Relief Coordination Center, and this is a clearinghouse. It's a coordination mechanism. When there is a state, be it a member state, be it a partner state, even non-partner state of NATO, it means a state that does not have any relations with NATO, like Pakistan, and if they come and ask NATO for help, usually NATO just reverts back to its member states, and they will collect everything they can provide, and then this help is provided. This was the case in Western Balkans, in Macedonia, in Montenegro, when the floods came, also during strong winters, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, with the fires, but also in Ukraine, Moldova, and many other states. And I mentioned Pakistan, for example, after the earthquake, or after the Hurricane Katrina in the United States. Even the United States asked NATO for help when they needed so. And then this is the assistance of the non-governmental sector. NATO can support the public diplomacy grants and science for peace programs, and this is what I mentioned in the beginning, that Slovakia got this 2 million euros in projects for its subjects in the last 2 or 3 years. And then if we just may click the next slide, there will be one slide that I displayed last time. No, this is just the disaster relief that assistance that NATO is doing, really, as I mentioned. Next slide. Yeah, this is what I displayed last time, and this is one of the projects that we are still conducting in Serbia, in Kragujevac, to decompose the surplus ammunition. As I said, over 9 million euros invested in this project. It not only helps Serbia to get rid of the ammunition, but also it provides the jobs for the people who are doing it, because otherwise the Kragujevac factory would not be that well manned, because they would probably not have enough money to do what is needed. Next slide. One of the projects that we did in the past, and that was also millions of euros invested in reintegration of former members of the armed forces into society. Those were the funds of NATO provided to Serbia as well. So some millions are flowing from NATO to Serbia, not only to Serbia, just to all partner nations. This is mostly based on the demands. If Serbia comes and say, look, we have problem with the surplus ammunition, we would seek for your help, it's really doable. In Moldova, for example, there's a project, and it's a really flagship project and the only project how to promote NATO. It's what's this? We are destroying pesticides in Moldova. At the first sight, you would say NATO pesticides. If you go to Moldova and ask about NATO and ask 10 people, 8 of them will tell, that's this pesticide project. Because NATO is not very popular in Moldova for many reasons, but this is something that people know, and this project has been active for several years. And I'm coming to my last slides. This is what I found on the internet, and maybe Milan will help me with English, but I like it very much because it reads, if you fail to bribe the right person, you will be prosecuted in court of law. This was a public campaign, I think, in the United States. And how I understand it, I can understand in two ways. The first one, if you fail to bribe someone, then you, of course, will be prosecuted. On the other hand, if you read it just logically, you have to find the right person to bribe, because otherwise you will be prosecuted. So if you go and bribe someone, then just be careful who you deal with. And why I'm mentioning this, because your country is very active in building integrity. That's a NATO project that aims at fighting corruption in defense sector. This is something that is very actual in all our countries, and Serbia is one of the countries and one of the most active partners in this. And next slide. And this should be, yes, and I talked about the NGO sector support, and this is the Belgrade Security Forum, one of the projects that NATO has sponsored. And with this, I'm coming to my last slide, and this is thank you for this, I don't know, 40 minutes that I spent, and if you have any questions, just keep them for the next time, since we don't have time. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. The applause demonstrates that the lecture was not only brief but also precise and interesting. So thank you very much for that. As we are back online with our picture. Wonderful. We can continue with our debate. We have 5 questions to cover. The 2 teams have assembled here in Bratislava. Of course, we are sending our best to Serbia and to Belgrade in connection with the floods. As we hear, the water is receding, but it will take some effort to get things in order. So we will wish you that you have the stamina to put the things in order. And we, of course, are very sad about the loss of the lives in the floodings. We were told that this was the flood of 120 years, so hopefully it will not repeat itself in another 120 years. But we all know that these disasters, they are terrible. We will come back to the question of NATO and prosperity. So the first question is, do you believe that membership in NATO is connected with prosperity and contributes to creating jobs? And I'd like to give the floor first to the team from Belgrade, and then the team from Bratislava will answer the question. And then the team then the students in Belgrade will have an opportunity to ask the questions. So whoever.
Okay, I can start. So, well, it is really connected, but we don't need to forget that many other factors are connected with prosperity and contributes to creating jobs, such as labor skills of people and, do you hear me? Yeah. Currency stability. But there is this thing that if you are more secure, you will have more jobs and more investments. So I will talk about V4 countries and experience and Bulgaria experience. For example, in Poland, after they became a member of NATO, foreign investments have risen, especially greenfield projects, in about $2 billion in period of 1999 to 2004. In Hungary, as in Poland, foreign investments have roughly doubled in period of 4 years. Also, in Czech Republic, they have more foreign investments in projects such as highways and infrastructural projects, which is really important if you want to create jobs and to contribute to more secure environment for investors. NATO is a factor for investment because you are sending a message that we are secure here. Your money will be secure here. Just bring it to us, and we will know what to do with it because we need it. and you are sending a message, and this is crucial because symbolic of NATO is not just military. It's symbolic that you had reforms, that you are predictable, that you have opportunities to cooperate with many other countries, and this is really crucial. For Bulgaria, their former Foreign Minister Solomon Pasi said that security is most attractive asset for international capital. So Bulgaria become a member of NATO and EU, so they had $1 billion fundraise from these security issues for infrastructural projects, which is crucial for them because they had a problem with corruption and things like that. And if you have that kind of problem, you need NATO to become more secure if you want to be a grown-up country, if I may say that. Security is oxygen to prosperity. If you're not secure, you will not prosper enough to become a fully developed country as you are. So these are the reasons as why NATO is one part of this whole scheme, why you need to be there in order to prosper and have maybe a great amount of new jobs in your country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That statement, security is oxygen to prosperity, that's a headliner. Now, Team Bratislava.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with you on the basis on the security being connected with prosperity. And as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was based on the principles that we heard a few minutes before, the rule of law, democracy, and protection of the individual freedoms, these values are important to the NATO and the member states, or the states that wish to become part, must comply with them, adhere to these principles. As such, all of the members and the potential members are following in these steps and provide economic and political freedoms for the people to participate at the professional level at the full scope of their potential. A society based on those principles are on the best way to thrive economically, politically, and socially. With the increased cooperation inside of the alliance, the countries that are members of the alliance, as well as the decreased threat of military action taken against them connected with the security, provide a great opportunity for creating the prosperity and also create jobs. As the enlargement of the NATO is ongoing, its influence to adhere to these principles is not limited only to the states that are already members of NATO, but also to countries that aspire to become a part of the organization, because they need to meet the requirements of membership set both by the 1995 study on enlargement, and the beneficial results of such cooperation start even before one becomes a member of NATO. They start by reforms and improving the situation in the states in order to become a part of NATO. So to answer the question, I do believe that NATO has a connection with prosperity and creating the jobs, mainly, as was said by my Serbian colleague, connected with security as the oxygen for prosperity.
Thank you to both of the teams. Now, the students in Belgrade, if they wish, you don't have to move it. The students in Belgrade, if they wish to answer a question, they can answer a question. Belgrade?
No, no, you're fine. Thank you. Thank you.
There is no question?
No.
Oh, there is. Go ahead and answer a question. You have been sitting there very disciplined for the last almost 2 hours. So you should have at least one question to ask about prosperity and security. If that is not the case, then I'll ask the audience here in Bratislava whether any one of the students wants to ask a question on prosperity and security. Nobody feels that he wants to ask a question. Okay, let's not torture you. We will go to the second question of our debate. And that is that connection between defense expenditure and their public financing of other programs, of other priorities. Do you believe that the membership in NATO increases defense expenditures to the detriment of other priorities that the national governments have to address? Now, Team Bratislava is first, and then Team Belgrade will follow.
Thank you. My answer is no, because in my opinion, security is very important. State should be able to secure its territory, and the membership in NATO helps the states to secure its territory, basically, under the Article 5. And therefore, the state should be willing to sacrifice some amount of money on defense. But as we see now, the defense budgets of member countries are decreasing. The capabilities are not so. There are a lack of capabilities, and that threaten the ability of NATO to secure its own secure its its goals, and so, as we see in the situation in Ukraine, the security situation in Europe is changing. We thought that we are living in secure environment, and this is not the case. Russia took the Crimea with violent way, military operation. We were not prepared for this kind of act, and in my opinion, the military spending should be higher, and that will be the future of NATO. Thank you.
Thank you for that brief answer. Now, Team Belgrade.
Thank you. Well, to answer the question, I agree with my colleague here from Bratislava, and my reply would also be no. And I would like to elaborate a bit on that. Well, to begin with, NATO as itself has its specific goals and the way why the organization is the way it is. So if we look at military and defense politics and policies of a country, we could not say that they are irrelevant. So basically, they need to be developed. What is the case with NATO at the moment? In the last couple of years, we've seen a decrease in the budgets of several countries. I mean, not several, most of the countries. So in the EU, the tendency is as follows. Smaller countries such as Latvia and Lithuania have decreased their military spendings and budgets for as much as up to 36% that we've seen in Lithuania. Middle countries such as Czech Republic and Ireland have decreased their budgets by about 10%, and the bigger countries such as Germany and the UK only for 8%. Why is this important, and why is it important to keep at least the status quo of the budget? Well, as my colleague said, yes, security, and as my colleague said, security is very important for future prosperity. Well, to see what the problems were with the current budget. So NATO has problems such as wasteful military duplications and uncoordinated drawdown of capability, which I just mentioned. Also delays and cost explosions in procurement projects. Well, defense, all these problems matter and have to be tackled, but not at the expense of further reductions of the budget, because security costs. It is very easy only to notice the importance of maritime and energy security challenges, because if you look at Germany, for example, which is one of the bigger countries of Europe, their importance of their ship paths, shipping lanes, such as Strait of Hormuz and Strait of Malacca, which for example, get very easily attacked by pirates, need to be secured by the NATO and by their security ministry. Also, economic benefits of defense are, as we've heard also from Mr. Bator are just emphasizing innovation in a country. For example, Slovakia, which got 2 million for their science projects. Also technological development and international competitiveness and employment. And also one other important factor in keeping the defense budget and keeping the NATO values and the connection that is currently as it is because defense investments help also protect values and strengthen international cooperation. This is also very important because the budget that NATO has to be fairly distributed in several areas. If we look at the NATO, the perception of it basically is that it is US-led. I believe that it is important for Europe to also gain a higher perspective of NATO importance in itself, which will be difficult considering the rise of Euroscepticism that we've noticed. So with all of this, I think it is very important not to diminish the role of NATO that it has so far. Also, like important to-dos that can be mentioned for NATO countries based on their budget is to specify threat and security risks to members and to the public policy to gain more of their to gain more support, basically. And one of the other important, especially lately, problems was Ukraine. So as a NATO member, Germany, France, UK, they also have to take into consideration their allies and their Baltic countries, Visegrad countries, and also Balkan countries, who will get direct or indirect effect of the Crimea situation, which will also have direct on other allies. So to sum up and to finish, I believe strongly that reducing further defense budgets would have several bad effects, which will have a spillover effect throughout the allies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a question here in the audience in Bratislava? Anybody wants to ask a question about budgeting and investing into defense? Nobody in Belgrade? Any question in Belgrade connected to defense budgets and other priorities? No question? No. Then I'll have an additional question to the teams. You know, as we take individual security and then a country being a part of a collective security system, it would be logical that when you are alone, you have to develop a range of individual capabilities. That means that if you want to be good of them, you have to invest actually appropriate amounts of money into building these capabilities, because otherwise you're going to be vulnerable. In a collective security system, you, however, can share the burden with your allies. One can develop a certain capacity, another country can invest more into a different capability. That does not mean that you fully can rely on the capabilities of others, but certainly it would seem logical to me that you would spare a considerable amount of financing from your own budget. Do you believe that this is the case, Bratislava?
In my opinion, you are right that membership in NATO can help us to specialize on one capability. Slovakia is, I think, we can provide very good military training centers like Lešť and others. I think that's all.
Thank you. Yes, this is a good point, that each member has their own specialized capability, which is very important towards others. Serbia, for example, has been developing our defense system, and one of the important parts of it is our medical staff, for example, which is very valuable. We are not that capable to provide technique or tanks, and as we see the situation right now with the floods, we need a lot of help from our neighbors, not only important to whether NATO or Russia, but we just need military equipment, and we need tanks, we need amphibians, we need helicopters. We don't have that. But when it comes to, for example, medical staff, Serbia has good capacity and a very good institute, a national military academy for medicine that can be beneficial towards allies.
Thank you. I'm glad that you have mentioned natural disasters, because the third question deals exactly with this issue, and that is whether NATO can be engaged and helpful in the countries which are not its members, and what it can actually do. And when we were thinking about the questions, it was, of course, far ahead of today's debate, and we did not foresee that there would be heavy rain in Serbia and there would be an absolutely horrific flooding. So the question is, what do you believe that the alliance can do with the countries that are not its members with respect to natural disasters or in humanitarian relief? Team Belgrade.
Thank you. Yes, of course, as we mentioned already, nowadays Serbia is witnessing one of the biggest natural disasters in the living memory of the region, and we see what happens when we are unprepared and we have unprepared management mechanisms to deal with this kind of disasters, and we see the importance and relevance of this question as we importance of this enhanced international cooperation in the field of disaster relief and wider relief operations on truly international basis. And NATO is really useful in this kind of situation, because they can have the mechanism to apply its coordinating procedures also in this case of natural disasters outside NATO's boundaries, if requested to do so by either by a relevant international organization such as International Federation of Red Cross and Crescent Societies, or UN Office for the coordination of humanitarian affairs. And also NATO has a center, as we heard from the lecture, Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Center, which is established in 1998. And it's NATO's local focal point for coordination of assistance provided by allies and partners in cases of civil emergency. And it has responded more than 60 requests of assistance. Of course, the example of already mentioned Pakistan is the very first time where this kind of help has provided after the earthquake in 2005, and we saw that why is this really important to help the national authorities and the whole international community, and we saw that NATO has provided strategic airlift to transport those urgently needed relief supplies, and why are helicopters, for example, really efficient when the roads are often badly damaged, as we can see today in Serbia. And of course, when NATO helps in this way, we can learn much from these kind of things, because every in the future, the next disaster that we'll deal with, we can see which mistakes have been made, and we can try to not repeat them. And this kind of approach, I think, in my opinion, is really crucial for the future. This multilateralism in those kind of situations. For example, we see the big role of European Commission and European Union today in Serbia, and I hope so that this will continue and to diminish all the consequences of this disaster. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe so. I mean, at the same way as my colleague do, the response of NATO uh, to natural or humanitarian disasters in a non-state member in a state which are not members of the NATO is kind of crucial, and not just from the point of view that it goes about it. There are human lives in stake, and there is also a security dimension in this. Especially in the case of humanitarian disasters, government can be challenged by the regional groups or over incapability to react to natural or humanitarian disaster. Through the humanitarian aid, NATO can contribute to particular state capabilities to sustain and react to natural or man-made disaster, and therefore contribute to decrease the tension between the citizens of particular region and the government, which would be reflected in intra or interstate level. That means that by decreasing the hatred or the disputes from citizens towards the state, when the citizens are usually questioning what is state doing. We are here in floodings. No one is caring about us. We need some aid, some supplies, and so on. Where's the state? This could also lead to security dilemmas when there can be the rising separatist ideas or actually rising ideas about penetration into state sovereignty. In preventive steps, what can NATO do is implementing those earliest capabilities and all the capabilities which we are developing as a member state or as a member state of the NATO to actually promote the peace, save the lives, and also keep the territory safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a question here in Bratislava about disaster relief? Everybody is all smiles, but no questions. Belgrade, how about yourselves? Do you feel that you wish to ask a question about disaster relief and NATO?
Well, actually, there is a one question from here. If you can hear me.
We can hear you wonderfully. Just ask your question, please.
The biggest help I'm talking about moments that are happening right now here in Serbia. The biggest help came from the countries that actually are not any way related to the NATO in means like that those are countries from region. Like Montenegro or Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Russian Federation, and that countries from that are members of NATO also sent some help, like France or I think Germany or Austria. But the thing is that it's not everything about doing things after it happened. It's not everything about doing saving your lives after disaster happened. What is the role of NATO in member states in preventing things like that, in preventing floods, in developing infrastructure, and developing capabilities of military and other forces like police or special forces in preventing disasters to happen, not reacting after it happened.
Wonderful. The question is clear. So what can NATO do in being ready and prepared for action after the disaster strikes? Bratislava?
Well, I think on the level of NATO can provide the environment to share the ideas or share the knowledge of what is actually could happen and what needs to be prevented from happening. So this is what I mean. I mean, in the case of the states, it's mostly the state's responsibility to build this kind of capabilities. In case the state is not capable to build a sufficient amount of the capabilities, the NATO can provide the rest on the call of the state. But first of all, it's the role of the state, and the NATO can be a platform for discussion, for exchanging the ideas, and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Firstly, as I already mentioned, the NATO activates his mechanism when on the basis of the request. Member states and also international organizations such as United Nations can call NATO to manage this kind of situation, and this is done only on this kind of thing. And the second question about what can NATO do, I agree with my colleague that this is already NATO already does this. As I already mentioned, Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Center organized discussions when ideas can be changed, and when we can learn some things. For example, after the Pakistan earthquake or floods in Ukraine, Moldova, and after the Montenegro case last year. So we can learn from past and try to not repeat the same mistakes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to be informative, as far as I was reading the newspaper reports, Serbia, of course, asked for assistance, the countries which are neighboring, because that's the most logical. And in addition to that, it had also requested help from Russia and the European Union. And our colleague from Belgrade was right in pointing out that the help from Russia and some countries of the European Union was already coming in. But the fact is that Serbia did not ask NATO for assistance after the flooding. Do you think that such a request could or should have been made? And do you think that in the future, if a disaster of these dimensions strikes again, it might be useful to request help from NATO? Slovakia.
Well, in case of the request, if it should or could be, I think it could be. It really depends on perspective from the state level, if it should be or not. I'm not really familiar with the situation in Serbia. I know about floodings, but I'm not really familiar with a particular situation in the region. So that's, I think, question for Serbia, if it could be or if it should be. Yeah. And I'm sorry, what was the?
In future, would it be useful if anything like this happened to ask for assistance?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely would be useful to ask for assistance. At the same time, as the colleague from Belgrade said, it's really logic to ask the neighboring countries for help, because this help can reach the region faster than the help from distant countries. In case of asking in case of asking help from NATO, I think the NATO is getting closer and closer to Serbia. We already have some members from this region, and even though we are a little bit far away, I mean, in case of Slovakia, it's not that far. You are bordering with Hungary, which certainly has this capacity to provide for you some kind of airlift and helping you with this. So I think that's all.
Thank you. Now, Belgrade team.
Thank you. I think that requests of assistance cannot be harmful in this kind of situation, because we really need extra help from every organization or country. But I think that the government decision is based on political reasons, maybe more than and the reason why they ask for help, European Union, for example, is reflecting the pattern that Serbia wants to follow in the future. And regarding the future, I think that it will be useful for every country, not Serbia, to use every chance that is given to her. And I really think that because of the situation, which is very serious, that there is a space for cooperation, and because of the consequences of this flooding that cannot be passed really easily.
Thank you very much. I think that after Serbia copes with the aftermath of the flooding, there will be certainly an analysis of how to prepare better for the next time when such a disaster strikes again, meaning what you can do more in prevention, but also how you can better coordinate an international aid from abroad. And this might be a good point, that asking for assistance if a disaster of this dimension strikes again, any partners who are at least in the vicinity and can offer a helping hand might be good. We are coming to our fourth question, and that is connected to what has been happening in the eastern Ukraine, especially the annexation of Crimea by Russia. And the question is, do you believe that the events in Ukraine, especially the annexation of Crimea and aggressive policies by Russia, must be followed by sanctions? If not, what other effective responses to external destabilization of any country can we offer? Team Belgrade, whoever wants to pick up.
Thank you very much. With regards to this, as Mr. Bator pointed out, this is probably the most sexy issue with regards to international relations and NATO at this moment. And with regards to Serbia, Serbia has been put into a very precarious situation with regards to what happened in Crimea and with what is happening in Ukraine right now, mainly for three broad reasons. Firstly is, of course, the Kosovo situation, which has been ongoing in Serbia for the last decade and a half. That is, that if a precedent is truly set in Crimea, that would have further ramifications for the international recognition of Kosovo, which is a key foreign policy issue for Serbia. So that is why Serbia has been very, very careful in its stance with regards to the Crimea situation. Broadly, Serbia is also valuing its partnership with Russia, which is a key trade partner. About 8% of Serbian exports go to Russia, which makes Russia, I believe, the third or fourth biggest trade partner of Serbia. Also, more importantly, 80% of natural gas imported into Serbia comes from Russia. So Serbia is very careful with regards to this. Also, the situation in Crimea will probably significantly, by proxy, harm Serbian trade. The estimate, according to the Economist newspaper, was that Russian GDP was supposed to grow about 1.5% this year. After the Crimea annexation, it's more likely that Russia will have zero or even negative growth. Considering that a lot of our exports go there, it will probably have also consequences on Serbian GDP growth this year, which is also forecasted to be between 0.5 and 1%, but with regards to the recent flood, it could probably be lower than that, perhaps even negative. So, with regards to the European Union and the United States stance on the issue, Serbia is aspiring to be a European Union member. It is a candidate state, so it is very careful with regards to its allies in the European Union. So the stance put forward by Serbia, both by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister, and the President, has been a very neutral one. Serbia has not taken a definite side on the issue and will probably not take one in the future. However, our allies, both in Russia and in the European Union, have been very understanding of this. Russia has been very supportive of the Serbian stance, and the European Union has shown its full understanding. So Serbia is not suffering any direct consequences, but no matter what happens in Ukraine, it will have big ramifications both to the Serbian economy and both to Serbian policy with regards to the southern region of Kosovo. Now, with regards to speaking about sanctions more broadly and what effects they have, I think that we should always look at sanctions from the perspective of what consequences can they cause. Now, firstly, I think that the EU and NATO have to put sanctions on Russia as a matter of principle of protection of international law and the principle of state sovereignty and integrity. But what is perhaps far more important here is to look at the real effects and credibility of sanctions. Now, as I already pointed out, Russia is willing to accept a certain degree of economic loss with regards to pursuing its own foreign policy interests. That's why Russia is prepared to suffer negative GDP growth this year in exchange for annexing Crimea. So the economy is not the most important issue to them. But more importantly, European trade is also dependent on Russia to a certain extent. So it is very likely that both especially the European Union and the United States, but to a significantly lesser degree, will also suffer from economic sanctions put on Russia. They can also backfire with regards to how cold this winter will be, considering that a significant amount of European gas imports are coming from Russia, especially in eastern countries like the Baltic states and Poland. So what is, if sanctions cannot completely work, what is the alternative? The first one is, of course, the so-called smart sanctions, which usually hit the political leaders and the business leaders, so imposing visa bans, travel bans on a lot of Russian politicians and oligarchs is something which would probably be very effective. More talk about negotiations, but also the most important thing would probably be setting a definite red line. What is the point up until which Russia can go? That is especially important considering that Baltic states, which are NATO members, have significant Russian minorities, which could also cause unrest, considering that the slippery slope has already started since the annexation of Crimea. So in essence, a red line is something which is definitely needed, and more negotiation is something which is definitely needed, along with smart sanctions, because regular sanctions usually hit the people on the ground the most, and they don't help diffuse the situation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team Bratislava.
Thank you very much for the floor, for speaking. Good afternoon to Belgrade. My name is Peter, and I will answer this question from the Slovak point of view. Well, I think that Ukraine crisis raising two important questions, which is connecting to our identity, who we are and where we belong. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of our membership in EU and NATO. We accept that this membership can be benefit for us, but I think that from Slovak point of view, we don't accept that this membership can have a quite negative aspect. My colleague asked me before this debate whether we are more pro-Russian or pro-European or anti-Russian. I think that we are neither pro-Russian nor anti-Russian, but we don't want to harm our relations with Moscow. We are on the same boat, I think, because 80% of our energy import is coming from Russia. So we are in the same situation. And once again, it's a question of identity, whether we accept this so-called Western approach to Russia or whether we decide to go on our own way. In regard to Crimea, what do you think? What is the fundamental basis of Crimea? It is, from my point of view, it is the changing of borders on ethnic principles, which is a very sensitive question for us, and I think very sensitive question for you. And from my point of view, as a Western member of EU and NATO, we accept it very easily, without no discussion, no sanctions, and no deeper view what can Crimea under the Russia bring to the Central Europe or to the South Europe. And on the other side, I think that we should accept that Russia has also own interest. But we cannot accept the creation of instability in Eastern Europe, because Russia did it in Georgia, Russia do it in Moldova, in Transnistria, and Russia does it in Crimea and in Eastern Ukraine. So it's a very complicated question, and it depends on our credibility. And what's now and what should be the next. I agree with my colleague that yes, there are some kind or some sort of smart sanctions and then hard sanctions. I think that we should use Henry Kissinger approach that there is a sugar and whip. We should show that we are willing to negotiate, but we should show that we are willing to harm Russia. So that's my answer to this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your responses. Now, anybody in Bratislava who wants to ask a question on this topic? That's not the case. Belgrade? A question on the topic of annexation of Crimea and sanctions? Nobody? Then I have a question to both teams, which was inspired by what the teams have been mentioning in their responses, and that is that the world order, as we know it since the World War II, as it has been enshrined in the Charter, says that the use of force or the threat of force is prohibited in international law. When Russia annexed Crimea, it overstepped and breached international law, which means that this must have an impact on bilateral relations. Russia did not hurt only international law, which exists as if somewhere, but it is also connected to the countries that are respecting international law. So by doing what it did, Russia hurt the countries that are respecting the international order, and there is only one demonstration that they can do before recurring to a military action, and that is that introducing sanctions. And the truth is that the sanctions must have two goals. First, they should hurt the perpetrator, and they should attempt to change his behavior. This is, I think, a goal of the sanctions. As for the first aim, to hurt the perpetrator, of course, when you are looking at the trade and the measures that you will introduce, you must pick those that will be more felt by Russia than the countries that are introducing it. And secondly, sanctions must contribute to finding the ways how such a behavior does not repeat itself, or how the behavior is being changed. So my question is, after this longer entry, do you believe that that really the policies of the countries should be set by our economic dependencies? Meaning that if we are interested in a good relationship with Russia, we can't even say to Russia that we are not satisfied with the violations of international law that you are doing and you are endangering an international world order because the trade which we have with Russia is something that is drawing our policies. Should it be the trade that should be driving our policies? Bratislava.
Thank you very much for the question. Well, it depends on decision what we want to sacrifice. Whether we want to sacrifice our economic prosperity or whether we want to sacrifice future stability. It's a very simple question. Future stability and economic dependence. I think that without stability as an oxygen for economic prosperity, there will be no current economic prosperity, because I think that situation would be worse and worse. So that's my answer. Thank you.
It is my belief that the main goal of every policy should be the preservation of the stability of the international order. For example, the NATO intervention in Yugoslavia in 1999 was probably a violation of international law in the sense that it didn't have a UN Security Council mandate, but it did contribute to stability in the region in the long run. So in essence, even though it was not strictly according to international norms, it did contribute to stability. Consequently, with regards to this issue, the violation of international law does lead to further instability. But if the situation can be diffused in a way which does not lead to a post-Cold War re-entanglement in bad relations with Russia, it should be done in such a way. It is unfortunate that international law, even to nominally it does apply to everyone, does not do that in practice, but it is my belief that it is unfortunate, but negotiations with Russia have to function in a different way than they would function with a very small and very weak state which does not respect international law. True, Russia did break international law, but getting into further bad relations will probably not help the diffusion of the situation, especially considering that it is not that easy to change Russia's behavior with sanctions, both because of economic interdependence and both because Russia has a strong domestic economy. So I think that true, international law is important, but what should be the most important thing are the consequences which are caused by sanctions. And my belief is that classic economic sanctions will not necessarily lead to a diffusion of the situation in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And then the very logical question is, what is it that can lead to a changed behavior and how we can react to that?
Do you ask what? Okay, so do you ask what kind of sanctions do we use? It should be the gradual rising of sanctions if Russia does not change behavior, I think.
Broadly, with regards to Ukraine, that would be a threat of sanctions in the future. But first of all, there should be negotiations with the current Ukrainian government, hopefully a creation of a transitional one, a federal constitution for Ukraine with the possibility of referenda for regions which do not identify as Ukrainian, or trying to solve the situation in Ukraine as itself and reverting to secession or to forcibly keeping the country together after all other resorts have been taken out. At this moment, I'm not under the impression that anything has been done to try to solve the situation in Ukraine itself. The far right is very strong in Kiev. On the other hand, pro-Russian nationalists are very strong in eastern Ukraine. And I'm not under the impression that either the Western countries nor Russia have been doing anything to try to lower the steam and to diffuse the situation on the ground. So that would probably be the first step. And after that, we should have the talk about the possibility of sanctions.
Wonderful. We will go to our fifth and last question. As we are looking at Serbia's negotiation on the accession towards the European Union, do you believe that the negotiation with the European Union might strengthen its alignment with the values of NATO? Meaning, as the negotiations between Serbia and the European Union progress, do you believe that value-wise Serbia would come up closer to NATO? Bratislava.
Okay, all of us, we are students, and we discuss a lot on the lectures what kind of power or what kind of institution is European Union. There are a lot of concepts of civilian power, normative power, military power, and so on. There is one important term. It's a Europeanization. It's a continuing process of adaptation of domestic politics, domestic norms to the standards of European Union. And well, the European Union is based on dignity, on rule of law, freedom, and so on. And European Union has also own tools how to force the adaptation of these norms. It is for candidate country through the Copenhagen criteria that every candidate country should fulfill it. So that's the one way how to adopt this kind of so-called Western norms into domestic system, and it could happen to close the distance between NATO and Serbia. I don't think that it should be fulfilled by membership of Serbia in NATO, but the distance between NATO and Serbia would be shorter. And yes, this kind of Europeanization or Westernization is also applied to the countries which are not candidate countries. For example, in Northern Africa, because they want to fulfill our criteria, because they want to be integrated into internal market of European Union. So there are a lot of tools how to force these standards and norms into another countries, and I think that it could help to the shortening of distance between NATO and other countries, probably Serbia. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Can you pass the mic?
Okay. Yes, we also believe that. Yes, but I'm not on the screen. Okay, hello. Yes, we could move a camera a little bit, but never mind. You can hear me. That is enough, I suppose. Yes, we believe that negotiations with the European Union will strengthen a country's alignment with first the EU values, and after that with those of NATO, because we were speaking about values throughout this whole discussion. Values like freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, and decision making by consensus. And those values are values of Western world. But there is a fact that both NATO and European Union are the organizations that are made on the values of Western world. Basically, those are organizations of Western world, and because of that, when you are closer to the values of one, you're automatically close to the values of another. After that, I would like to present the logics why would European negotiations with the European Union would strengthen those values in the country that is in the process of negotiation. First of all, there are two arguments. First of all is the fact that that country is in the process of negotiation, which is telling us two things. First, that it needs to be that country has interest to become part of the organization, and second is a willingness to sacrifice something or to accept some rules in order to become part of the organization, and that is the simpler one. The more complicated one is the situation in countries that are negotiating with, for example, EU, because mostly I'm focused now on ex-socialistic countries or ex-communistic parties. They have countries. They have a lot of problems, but I saw two problems as really important. First is crash of political system, and second is crash of system of values. And because of that, we have really unstable societies. What happens in the process of negotiations? Because the whole process is complicated. It has high standards and it's really demanding, and it lasts for very long. In that process, we have internalization of values, slow internalization of those values that we are talking about, and because of that, we have consolidation of political system. Consolidation of system of values, and third and most important and really important thing is we have higher living standard of population, of broader population, so we have higher support for those values and for those integration. Yes, there are problems such are right-wing political parties, economical, financial problems, but the most important benefit of that logic is that countries are now solving those problems, and for example, right-wing parties, they are in parliament, so we have institutional way of solving problems, and that is enough to say that we made some progress, and that is the main condition under which there is possibility to make further progress and further development of the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Belgrade, final question for you. Any questions that you would like to ask? No? Everybody's nodding. No questions? Bratislava here? No questions either. I think that we have not exhausted the topics because we could continue our debate with these interesting questions and with highly prepared teams for a longer period of time. If you allow us in Belgrade, here in Bratislava, we will continue that with both of the teams now afterwards our debate. We'd like to thank you both to Belgrade and here in Bratislava for being with us, being patient, because it took us a while to get things running smoothly here, but we are glad that we finally did that. I'd like to thank the university coordinators, both in Belgrade and here in Bratislava. Janja Simentic in Belgrade, is she there? Janja? Yes. Wonderful. And to Zuzka Hozlarova here in Bratislava. Zuzana, would you please kindly wave into the camera? Not in the camera, but she's out there, guys. She's waving. And I also would like to thank Tibor Moldvai, whom I saw in Belgrade, but whom I cannot see now. Okay, Tibor. And I'd like to thank our partner in Belgrade, which is represented by Tibor, Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies, for doing this continuation of our project, our joint project together today. We are looking forward to continuing tomorrow between the teams of Banska Bystrica and Novi Sad. I also would like to thank Lucia Klapachova, a colleague of mine at Mesa 10, for her input into the project. And of course, I'd like to appreciate the support that we are receiving from the National Endowment for Democracy for this continued project. With this, I'd like to thank both of the teams. Thank you for preparing for today's debate. We are looking forward to continuing the debate in the fall. And goodbye to Belgrade.
Bye.
Have a great day. Bye, guys.
Okay. That's it. That's it.